This Christmas, we'll be giving people living on the street the chance to come in from the cold and get off the streets for good. And for many older people, we'll be the only friendly face they'll see. Without the Salvation Army, so many poor and vulnerable people wouldn't have any kind of Christmas to speak of. But we can't do our job this Christmas without you, so please don't wait. Call us now on 0800 473 0077 and give just £19 now. That's 0800 473 0077. Thank you.
So we're just waiting for Prime Minister's questions to start. I think we're seeing the end in Parliament now of Scottish questions. We will, just as that is happening, we will, I think, continue with the debate about these numbers. We do have a copy of the assessment that has come in right now. I have to say it's fairly complicated in terms of the different scenarios that are involved. Let me run through a couple of the numbers. What they've done, as Adam was explaining, is that they have modelled no deal, an average free trade agreement, which you'd say is maybe Canada, and the white paper, and they've done, and an EEA arrangement too, on the basis of migration staying the same, and then migration of European workers stopping, which seems like a pretty harsh presumption, but nonetheless they've done this. Let's bring in again our guests. I'll introduce them again. James Frith, Labour MP for Bury North, Mark Francois, and Philippa Whitford from the Scottish National Party. So you were asking for the numbers for the basis of the debate. So let me just go through those again. So assuming no changes to migration, let's just go with that. Modelling the white paper, average 0.6% hit, though it could be, on a good day, almost nothing, miraculously, the white paper, or 1.3% hit over 15 years. In fact, let's go to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that the whole House would like to join me in paying tribute to Baroness Trumpington, who sadly passed away yesterday. From her time at Bletchley Park as a codebreaker during the Second World War, through to her time in government and public service, she led an extraordinary life and she will be sorely missed. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Rosie Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House would want to be associated with the Prime Minister's remarks. The misery inflicted on my constituents by Northern Rail continues unabated. Long waits for already full trains, don't arrive on time, whole day cancellations, and even the cancellation of last trains leaving people stranded. There can be no more excuses. This latest Northern Rail fiasco began in May with communications issues and, timetabling and communications issues. Prime Minister, isn't it time to get the communications right and timetable the end of the Northern franchise?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, I am clear, we are clear as a government, that the performance in the North and the disruption that was caused to rail passengers was unacceptable following the timetable changes that took place on May the 20th. I think it's clear that we saw a combination of delayed Network Rail infrastructure works and reduced time to plan a modified timetable, which meant that the new timetable was finalised too late. And we know that passengers are currently not getting the service they deserve, although there are more services in Northern Rail now than there were compared to earlier this year, but much more does need to be done. And of course what we are doing is working alongside Transport for the North, Northern Transpennine Express and Network Rail in improving services and improving punctuality. And of course, we have asked Richard George to review the performance of the region's rail network, to make recommendations to improve reliability, and where operators are found to be at fault, then we will take action.
Ross!
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. No one can question the Prime Minister's work ethic and determination to reach a deal with the European Union, a deal that many people thought was unachievable. But despite her best endeavours, there are still considerable concerns that many people have that this has left us with an uncomfortable choice, and I share those concerns. So as the Prime Minister heads to Scotland, can I ask what guarantees she can give to those who have concerns about the future of the fishing industry under this deal and also our precious union? Nicely done.
Can I say to my honourable friend that he's absolutely right to raise the issue of the fishing industry and of our precious union. And I am a committed unionist, as he is, and as indeed all my colleagues on the Conservative benches are. Our deal in relation to fisheries means that we will become an independent coastal state. That means that we will be able to negotiate access to our waters. We will be ensuring our fishing communities get a fairer share of our waters. We will be determining that issue of access to our waters. And we firmly rejected a link of access to our waters and access to markets. I have to say also that we are very clear, as I made clear in my statement on Monday, that we will not be trading off a fisheries agreement against anything else in this future relationship. And indeed, the support for the deal, I'm confident that my honourable friend will have seen the support for the deal that has been recognised by the Scottish Fishing Federation.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I echo the Prime Minister's words about Baroness Trumpington. We thank her for her service to this country throughout her life. We'll also remember her as a great code breaker and a very demonstrative member of the House of Lords with her physical symbols. And also her wit on Have I Got News for You. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to pay tribute to my friend Harry Leslie Smith. Harry passed away early this morning in Canada. Harry also served in the war. He was an irrepressible campaigner for the rights of refugees, for the welfare state and for our National Health Service. He was passionate about the principle of health care for all as a human right. We thank Harry for his life and his work. On Sunday, the Foreign Secretary said of their Brexit deal, it mitigates most of the negative impacts. Can the Prime Minister tell us which of the negative impacts it does not mitigate?
Can I first of all, I'm sure that the whole House will wish to pass our condolences as well to the family and friends of Harry Leslie Smith. What we see behind the analysis that we have published today, and indeed the Chancellor recognised this morning, is that our deal is the best deal available for jobs and our economy that allows us to honour the referendum and realise the opportunities of Brexit. This analysis does not show that we'll be poorer in the future than we are today. No, it doesn't. It shows we'll be better off with this deal. What would make us poorer, what would have an impact on our economy for the future, would be the policies of the Right Honourable Gentleman. More borrowing, higher taxes, fewer jobs. The biggest risk to our economy is the Right Honourable Gentleman and his shadow Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, on the same day that that statement was made, the Prime Minister said, this is the best possible deal, it's the only possible deal. Well, I mean to say, it's not hard to be the best deal if it's the only deal. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, by definition, it's also the worst deal. Mr. Speaker, the Government Economic Service forecasts published today are actually meaningless because there's no actual deal to model, just a 26-page wish list. The Chancellor, however, said that her deal will make people worse off. Does the Prime Minister agree? He doesn't appear to be here this morning to be consulted.
as I've just set out to the right honourable gentleman, what the analysis shows, it does show that this deal that we have negotiated is the best deal for our jobs and our economy, which delivers on the results of the referendum for the British people. And I believe that we should be delivering on the result of the referendum. But he talks about the political declaration. He calls it a wish list. Now, what he's describing is a political declaration that's been agreed between the United Kingdom and the European Union that sets out an ambitious, broad, deep and flexible partnership across trade and economic cooperation, law enforcement and criminal justice, foreign policy, security and defence, and wider areas of cooperation. And what does Labour have to offer? 6 bullet points. My weekend shopping list is longer than that.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of making our economy weaker through austerity, their botched Brexit threatens more of the same. Professor Alston said in his damning UN report into UK poverty, and I quote, "In my meetings with the government, it was clear to me that the impact of Brexit on people in poverty is an afterthought." In her Chequers plan, the Prime Minister promised frictionless trade with Europe after Brexit. Her future partnership guarantees no such thing. Does the Prime Minister understand why MPs are queuing up not to back her plan?
I can tell the right honourable gentleman who is backing my plan. Farmers in Wales, fishermen in Scotland, employers in Northern Ireland. When MPs come to look at this vote, they will need to look at the importance of us delivering on Brexit and ensuring that we deliver Brexit and doing it in a way that protects jobs. And on that subject, he referenced what had happened to the economy over the last 8 years. We've seen the number of young people not in education, employment or training at record lows. We see borrowing this year at its lowest level for 13 years. We see more people in work than ever before, the fastest regular wage growth for nearly a decade, and today we've seen the number of children living in workless households at a record low and the proportion of workless households at a record low. That's good, balanced management of the economy by the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, if it's good balanced management of the economy, then why did Professor Alston say there are 14 million people in our country living in poverty? And when she claims support for her deal, last week more than 200 chief executives and entrepreneurs described her Brexit deal as the worst of all worlds.
Order. Mr. Morris, calm yourself. Take some sort of soothing medicament if that is what is required. But above all, calm yourself. Jeremy Corbyn.
And, Mr. Speaker, a private email the CBI sent round says of the deal, no need to give credit to negotiators, I think, because it's not a good deal. All the Prime Minister can commit to is we'll be working for frictionless trade. She's gone from guaranteeing frictionless trade to offering friction and less trade. After these botched negotiations, Mr. Speaker, the country has no faith in the next stage of even more complex negotiations being concluded in just 2 years. So what does the Prime Minister think is preferable? Extending the transition with further vast payments to the European Union or falling into the backstop with no exit?
Well, as the right honourable gentleman knows, there is an exit from the backstop. There is an alternative to the backstop, but we don't want the backstop to be invoked in the first place. And neither does the government of the Republic of Ireland, and neither does the European Union. But let me just see, he's referring again to this issue of the political declaration and the nature of the political declaration. He will know that the European Union cannot agree and sign legal text on a trade arrangement with a country that is a member of the European Union, so they cannot do that until we have left the European Union. And let me just say this to him. The December joint report was 16 pages long, and it took less than a year to turn it into 599 pages of legal text. The political declaration is 26 pages long. It is perfectly possible to turn that into the legal text within the nearly 2 years it is available. At every stage, people have said we couldn't do what we've done. They said we couldn't get agreement last December, we did. They said we wouldn't get an implementation period, we did. They said we wouldn't agree a withdrawal agreement or political declaration, we did. It takes hard work and a firm commitment to work in the national interest, and that's what this government has.
Mr. Speaker, that would explain why the Business Secretary doesn't have much faith in this either. He's already discussing a transition period being extended to 2022, apparently. Parliament voted, Mr. Speaker, Parliament voted for the government to publish its legal advice in full. The government today says it will ignore the sovereign will of Parliament. In 2007, the Prime Minister wrote to the then Prime Minister saying the legal advice for the Iraq War should have been published in full to Cabinet and MPs. So why doesn't the Prime Minister practice what she preached?
Say to the right honourable gentleman, of course, there's a legitimate desire in Parliament to understand the legal implications of the deal. We have said, and we have been clear, that we will make available to members a full reasoned position statement laying out the government's legal position on the withdrawal agreement, and the Attorney-General is willing to assist Parliament by making an oral statement and answering questions from members. But as regards publication of the full legal advice, the advice any client receives from their lawyer is privileged. That's the same for government as it is for any member of the public.
Well, the Chancellor said what we're not going to do is publish the raw legal advice from the Attorney-General. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister herself wanted legal advice in the past. MPs need to see that advice, warts and all, so they can make their informed decision on this matter. The Prime Minister insists that her government will be able to negotiate every aspect of the UK's future trade relationship with Europe within the space of 2 years. We've had 2.5 years since the referendum. So far, 20 of our own ministers have resigned. This is the most shambolic government in living memory. And she is now asking Parliament to vote on the basis of a 26-page wish list without even seeing the full legal advice. It's now clear that Parliament will not back this plan. So isn't it time for her to accept that reality and make way for an alternative plan that can work for the whole country?
Let me say to the right honourable gentleman, I will take no lectures from the right honourable gentleman who has seen 100 resignations from his front bench. But I will also say this. Today we saw what really lies behind Labour's approach. Last night, the Shadow Chancellor told an audience in London that he wanted to seize upon a second referendum and vote Remain. So now we have it. They want to cause chaos, frustrate Brexit, overturn the will of the British people, and that would be a betrayal of the many by the few.
John Lamont, Mr. Lamont.
Mr. Speaker, Small Business Saturday takes place this week. This is a great campaign which encourages us all to support local shops and businesses across our land. In Scotland, there are over 340,000 small and medium-sized businesses supporting 1.2 million jobs. So will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the Federation of Small Business and all the small businesses who take part in this event, but particularly Lindsay Grieve, the butcher in Hoyk, Stems, the florist in Jedburgh, and Archie Humes, the gentleman's outfitters in Kelso.
Can I I thank my honourable friend for raising what I think we should all accept across this House is an excellent campaign, and I look forward, when I'm in his neck of the woods, perhaps to being able to visit some of the excellent shops that he has just quoted. It is important that we help small businesses, and that's why we're taking over 655,000 small businesses out of paying any business rates at all. And we want to change the system so that rates follow the lower level of inflation. That means a saving every year and worth over $5 billion to businesses over the next 5 years. And we're providing $900 million to cut eligible small retailers' bills by 1/3 for 2 years. So I congratulate Lindsay, Grieve, Stems the Florist and Archie Hume. I look forward possibly to visiting them, and I'm sure that many members of this House will be recognising the importance of small businesses on Small Business Saturday and championing the excellent contribution they make to our economy.
Ian Blackford!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I take the opportunity to wish everyone in the House a happy St Andrew's Day when it comes on Friday? Mr. Speaker, today the Chancellor said that the Prime Minister's Brexit deal will leave the economy slightly smaller, and in pure economic terms there will be a loss. Now, we now know that this has been confirmed by the government's own analysis that real wages will fall. Does the Prime Minister agree her deal will leave people poorer than the status quo?
The analysis shows no. What the analysis does not show that we will be poorer than the status quo today. What it shows, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. What the analysis shows is that this is a strong economy which will continue to grow, and that the model which actually delivers best on delivering for the vote of the British people and for our jobs and our economy is the model that the government has put forward, is the deal that the government is proposing.
Ian Blackford!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do wonder if the Prime Minister has read their own analysis, because quite clearly, under any scenario, leaving the single market and the customs union will be poorer. Yes. The Prime Minister wants to take us back to the days of Thatcher and a belief that unemployment is a price worth paying. That's the reality. No government, Mr. Speaker, should choose to weaken its economy and make its citizens poorer. That's what the Prime Minister is doing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will travel to Scotland today. People in Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain. We voted for our rights to be respected.
Order. No. The Right Honourable Gentleman is entitled to be heard, and he will be heard as every other member of this House will be heard. It's a simple point. Please digest it. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will travel to Scotland today. People in Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain. We voted for our rights to be respected, and we are not prepared to give up those rights. The Prime Minister must explain to the people of Scotland why her deal will rob them of their rights as EU citizens.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he started his remarks by comments about unemployment and the government's approach to unemployment. What do we see under this government? 3.3 million jobs have been created since the Conservatives came into power. And the OBR forecasting a further 800,000 more jobs being created in our economy. Employment rate is a near record high. Employment is at a record high. Unemployment rate has almost halved since 2010. And he talks about what the people of Scotland voted for. They voted to stay in the United Kingdom, and they voted for 13 Conservative MPs.
Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
It's a fact with any divorce proceedings that if the parties cannot reach a fair and equitable agreement, they go to a judge to ask for a decision. Mr. Speaker, in the case of the divorce between the UK and the EU, this Parliament must be the judge. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that once this Parliament has rejected the EU's controlling and dominating proposal, which won't leave us free to decide our future, that the UK will be better off actually spending the money we set aside to prepare for a clean global Brexit?
Can I say to my honourable friend that
Order. The honourable lady's question was heard, and I want to hear the Prime Minister's reply, and the Prime Minister is entitled to have that reply properly heard. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Backing this Brexit deal means that we will control our own borders, we'll end free movement once and for all, we'll protect jobs with a deal that's good for our economy, we'll no longer send vast sums of money every year to the European Union, we can spend it on our priorities, and we'll be able to strike free trade deals around the world, as well as taking back control of our laws and having a good security partnership. But if we reject this deal, we go back to square one, with damaging uncertainty that would threaten jobs, threaten our investment and the economy, and lead to more division. I mean, there was less time to focus on the issues that our constituents wish us to focus on. So I think the choice is backing the deal in the national interest so we can build that brighter future, or going back to square one if it is rejected.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Matthew, is one of those very brave people who've waived their anonymity around abuse they suffered at the hands of a member of the Church of England. The Prime Minister will be very aware of the harrowing evidence coming out of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which could have been prevented if a law on mandatory reporting had been in place. International evidence shows mandatory reporting doubles the number of children placed into safety when introduced. Will the Prime Minister commit to protect children and introduce mandatory reporting across all institutions, including the Church of England?
Well, can I first of all say how sorry I am to hear of the case of her constituent Matthew and the abuse that he suffered. Sadly, what we have seen coming out of this independent inquiry is too much abuse that was allowed to carry on for too long, and too many people suffered as a result. And it isn't just the case that they suffered at the time the abuse was taking place. That suffering remains with them to this day. And I think we should all recognise that. Now, she's raised the issue of mandatory reporting. We did look at this very carefully indeed, when I was Home Secretary, we looked at this very carefully. Actually, there is mixed evidence as to the impact that mandatory reporting has. And there is some evidence that some evidence that it can actually lead to the genuine cases not being given the resources that they require. But I say to the Honourable Lady, I don't want her to be in any doubt of the seriousness with which I and this government take this issue. We are repairing, doing our best to repair. I won't claim we can fully repair, but doing our best to repair by giving some sense of justice to those people who suffered at the hands of too many institutions, including institutions of the state, for too long.
Theresa Villiers.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents are worried about crime, and the Chancellor in his budget speech acknowledged that policing is under pressure because of the changing nature of crime. With decisions on the National Police Funding Settlement imminent, can I urge the Prime Minister to make sure we can get more police on the beat in Barnet and beyond?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I recognise the concern that she has expressed, and I'd like to reassure her that obviously we have been protecting police funding since 2015. We have enabled police forces to further increase funding through the council tax precept, and this year, including council tax, there's an additional £460 million available to the police. But I recognise that the issue that she has raised, and we will continue to ensure that the police have the resources they need to cut crime and keep our communities safe. But of course, there is also a role for Chief Constables and Police and Crime Commissioners as operational leaders and elected local representatives to decide how best to deploy resources to manage and respond to individual crimes and indeed to local crime priorities.
Chapman.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I know the Prime Minister is visiting Scotland today, and I hear that there's already great dancing in the streets. So, but like most Scots, I've been absolutely horrified by the arrogant, shambolic and non-inclusive way in which the government have gone about the Brexit negotiations over 2 tortuous years. What lessons has the Prime Minister learned so we can have a very simple, more productive and faster negotiations when we decide to dissolve the Act of Union?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he'll be well aware of the vote that took place in 2014 and the desire of the Scottish people to remain in the United Kingdom. We have, at every stage throughout the negotiations, been working with the devolved administrations. Indeed, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has been having regular meetings with the devolved administrations. Officials have been meeting them, so we have ensured that the voice of the devolved administrations has been heard in our negotiations.
Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The small businesses of North Dorset's market towns play a vital role in our local economy. On the cusp of Small Business Saturday, can she assure me that she will, and if necessary, intervene to ensure that the rules governing the provision of rural cash machines are safeguarded and that the actual needs of our rural communities are recognised, therefore underpinning those vital jobs and businesses in our rural communities?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend again for recognising the importance of small businesses, and particularly, as he says, in rural communities. And we recognise that the widespread free access to cash remains extremely important in the day-to-day lives of many consumers and businesses throughout the UK. Link, which is the UK's cash machine network, is committed to maintaining free access to cash through its extensive footprint of ATMs, and the Payment Systems Regulator set up by the government is ensuring that the UK payment system work in the interests of their users, and they regulate Link. And I can assure my honourable friend that the regulator is closely monitoring the situation and is holding Link to account for its commitments to maintain that broad geographic spread of ATMs across the United Kingdom.
David Linden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Watching your premature baby in an incubator, hooked up to oxygen, being given assistance to breathe, is an incredibly difficult experience, and I can say that because both of my children have been through that. But the reality is, with statutory paternity leave, the law does not work for parents of premature babies. We spend weeks on neonatal intensive care units, and we want to take our paternity leave more than the 56 days. So will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and the campaign Charity Bliss to look at how we can give support to parents of premature babies?
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this issue, which is obviously, through personal experience, very close to his heart, but I know one that is of concern to other members across this House. What I understand is that the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy is undertaking a review of the provisions for parents of premature babies, as they're the department responsible for the parental leave legislation, but also those that experience multiple births. And they're working with charities representing parents of premature babies, parents of babies who require neonatal care, to better understand the pressures and the issues that those parents have to face when their child is born prematurely or sick. They expect to be in a position to share the key findings of this review with interested parties in the new year, and I will ensure that the relevant minister from the department meets with him and the charity to hear that experience firsthand.
David Amos.
Last week, a debate took place at Durham Union. The motion was, this House believes that the United Kingdom is less united than ever. I was part of the team opposing the motion, and we comfortably defeated the motion. Would my right honourable friend agree with those young people that the agreement this House is being asked to vote on actually threatens our union, was worked out by largely unelected people, and has a distinct Remain flavour?
My honourable friend might not be surprised if I say, actually, I don't quite share his analysis of the deal that we've put forward. Look, this is a deal that does deliver on Brexit. I think this is important. It does deliver on Brexit, but it does so in a way that does protect our United Kingdom. That was an issue that I have set out in this House on many occasions, and it's one that we were very keen to ensure was dealt with in this deal. It's a deal that protects jobs, but it's a deal that delivers on people's vote to ensure that we leave the European Union, and that we do so in a way that delivers no free movement, no jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, not sending those vast annual sums to the European Union every year. But can I thank my honourable friend for engaging with those young people in Durham and debating this matter with them. I think it's very important we get young people, ensure young people maintain that interest in politics.
Dame Louise Ellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor has broadcast to the nation that Brexit will make the UK poorer. The Prime Minister's last-minute concession in Europe puts Gibraltar's future on the line. And our long-term trade arrangements are simply unknown. Article 50 can be revoked. Isn't it time for a people's vote with an option to remain?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, I mean, first of all, I've already referenced what the Chancellor said. Her reference to the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, to the issue of Gibraltar, goes absolutely contrary to what the Chief Minister of Gibraltar has said about the way in which the United Kingdom has absolutely stood by Gibraltar, and we will continue to stand by Gibraltar. She will have heard me saying before that I believe, in terms of a second referendum, it's important that we deliver on the vote of the British people. But I would also just ask her to consider this. It wouldn't be possible to hold a referendum before March the 29th of next year. That would mean having to extend Article 50. She wants to extend Article 50, delaying Brexit or leaving with no deal. I believe the best option for this country is to ensure that we deliver on the Brexit vote, that we leave the European Union next March, that we don't delay that point, and we leave with a good deal that will protect jobs across the country.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Is she concerned about religious persecution in the Holy Land, and will she welcome the visit of the Patriarch of Jerusalem?
Can I thank my right honourable friend, and of course, he will know that this weekend does mark the start of Advent, which is a time of expectation and hope for Christians. And today is Red Wednesday, a day when landmark buildings, including these Houses of Parliament, will turn scarlet as an act of solidarity with persecuted Christians. I would certainly like to welcome the Patriarch of Jerusalem for his upcoming visit. And I know that some Israelis can face additional structural challenges, particularly Christian and Muslim Arab Israelis, who experience higher rates of poverty and unemployment and who can face discrimination. And we certainly encourage the Israeli government to do all it can to uphold the values of equality for all enshrined in its laws. But can I give my right honourable friend the assurance that I will continue to work with governments, with the international community, with the United Nations, to support the rights of minorities, including Christians.
Sir Vince Cable.
In the next 10 days, there will hopefully be informed debate on the government's proposals on Brexit and various alternative routes, including an election, a people's vote, no doubt others. But there is absolutely no reason why the public should be alarmed by continuing discussion of a chaotic no deal, because it's entirely within the power of this House and the government to stop it. So will she reassure the public that under no circumstances this will happen?
The right honourable gentleman with his long years in this House will know that, as he has said, we will on December the 11th be looking at the deal that the government has negotiated with the European Union. I believe there is a clear choice. I believe backing that deal will provide people with certainty and ensure that we deliver on the vote of the British people in the best way for jobs and for our economy. And failure to back that deal, I believe, would lead to chaos and uncertainty for people for the future. And the clear message I get around the country is that people don't want that chaos and don't want that uncertainty.
Mrs Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This country exports vast amounts of plastic to developing countries. Could we, that's under the guise of recycling, could we incentivise recycling in this country and seek to ban us exporting our rubbish to other countries where it often ends up in landfill or in the ocean?
My honourable friend has raised an important issue, and she, I hope, recognises the action the government has taken in relation to plastic. I was very pleased yesterday when I was at the Winter Fair at the Royal Welsh to see a company that actually 29 years ago started taking plastic and turning it into products that people could use, recycling it into things like garden seats and tables. This was an innovative initiative 29 years ago. It's right bang, slap bang into what we all consider to be the right thing to do today.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is currently...
OK, we'll just dip out of Prime Minister's questions as it wraps up. We will go back to Parliament for an urgent question from John McDonnell, which will be about, I think, these assessments that we've just been talking about. Let's discuss what was a very interesting Prime Minister's questions, I think. Something different there, something in Jeremy Corbyn's porridge, certainly, that he's got plenty of material to work with in this current sort of crisis era. Let me introduce the panel again. James Frith from the Labour Party, Mark Francois from the Conservatives, and Philippa Whitford from the SNP. That was tough for the Prime Minister.
Well, I think that Corbyn, I have to say, performed well. But the other thing I think was really striking was that not one single Conservative backbencher backed the deal. About 4 or 5 criticised it. Not one Tory MP got up behind her and
normally you'd expect the whips to have set something up. A nice, easy underarm.
You can normally always find some, very ambitious, newly elected backbencher who will do their bidding. Nothing. This is the problem she's got. On the Tory backbenches, this thing is toxic. And nobody wants to stand up and defend it. And on that basis, it will never ever get through.
There are people defending it.
Not today, there weren't.
But there's Rory Stewart.
Yeah, but he's a minister. Where are the ordinary, poor bloody infantry of the Tory party getting up and saying, "Oh, I think this is a good idea"? They're not there.
Difficult to argue with that, Mr. James. You're smiling.
I'm anticipating a brilliant question.
Let me. Why? It's a bit of a sort of coalition of. You're going along with Mark Francois' criticism of the Prime Minister, but when push comes to shove, you're risking no deal, which you've got the figures in front of you now.
Let's be
Why
clear.
are you risking no deal?
It is within the gift of Parliament to determine there is no deal, no deal. Amber Rudd has said herself...
Is it?
Absolutely.
How?
Labour Party's position is that we'll work across Parliament to ensure
it
requires legislation, but Parliament... We cannot go into a Brexit conversation that talks about taking back control but forfeits any suggestion of us as a Parliament determining what we do now or next on this matter.
Right, you weren't an MP back in 2015, but your colleagues, including the Romanian ones, including some that now want a second referendum, voted through Article 50, knowing full well that at the end of 2 years the treaties cease to apply. But how can they now say, we don't want no deal?
We will be in new territory if this deal falls, which we expect.
But they've already given their consent to no deal, have they not? I mean, people did say this, and I'll say again, you weren't there at the time, so you can take a pass on this one to some degree. But plenty of your colleagues that now argue for a softer Brexit or no Brexit at all gladly walked through the division lobbies to trigger Article 50, knowing full well that 2 years on, the EU treaties ceased to apply by international agreement. Were they wrong?
That's a fair summary, and you're right that I wasn't there. What I'm facing is where we're at now, and the idea that it's her deal, Prime Minister's deal, or a no-deal scenario is a confection. It's not.
It's the legal reality. It's the constitutional reality.
It's not a choice. Parliament is not without its
you could argue it's not a political
choice,
but the point I'm pointing to you is I don't know. Other than changing the government somehow, the people in charge of the timetables of Parliament, you can't actually stop a no deal.
I don't believe that at all, and I don't sign up to that. So our party's position is that we will vote against this deal, that we will pass a motion or put a motion to the House that is a motion of no confidence and demand a general election. In the likely event, because we don't have the numbers, that we don't get that, we will support a public vote. And it is for Parliament to determine what happens next. We have not...
No, you don't think that, do you?
Hang on, that's not the Labour Party's position. The Labour Party's position is that all things would remain on the table, but it is not the Labour Party's position that they would then approve a second referendum. Who said that?
No, a public vote with all options on the table is
a public vote means a second referendum. That's what everybody means it to be. And forgive me, but Corbyn and McDonnell have not said what you just said. I'm sorry, they haven't.
Actually, the composite motion that the Labour Party position is that all options remain on the table, including
that's not what you said.
Including a public.
But with respect, that's not what you just said. What you said was, if we lose a vote of confidence, we will then vote for a second referendum, and that's not the policy of your party.
We are in the zone now, though. We are in the zone where if this goes down, which seems to be the expectation now, we're into the zone of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. And people are looking at it and saying, well, we might not have the 2/3 necessary for a general election, but we could well have a simple majority, which would activate the 14-day period. And what happens then? Mark Francois, what's ELG's plan? Do you have a plan?
Well, we are focused on defeating what we think is this terrible deal.
OK, what happens then?
OK, well, if the deal is defeated, which I honestly and earnestly believe it will be, the Prime Minister will then have to decide what to do. And presumably she will come back to Parliament with whatever she believes is the best way forward. So
you're being highly diplomatic here. It's not the sort of thing I've been hearing. I've been hearing people wondering what would happen in that 14-day period. What would happen with the DUP?
Well,
let's do this. What would happen with the SNP? Now, I've noticed a slight change in the language from the SNP.
In what sense?
Well, in the following sense, you were talking about a second referendum, but if it falls, if the meaningful vote fails, would you then be willing to back a tweaked version of what the government has been offering that offered EEA membership, for example?
Well, that would be slightly more than
a tweak. Okay, a bit of surgery,
well, it would be radical surgery, because obviously one of the things that we support in Scotland is freedom of movement. Scotland needs people, and actually the obsession with getting down to tens of thousands is a direct threat to us. But can I just... You were saying... Hang on,
just be clear. Just be clear. If there were people in the cabinet, let's just imagine, who were anticipating this deal will go down, and we're thinking we need a plan B, which is the single market, could you envisage you and the SNP voting alongside for Brexit of a single market flavour?
Well, not a single market flavour, and my concern about what's swimming around Norway for now is I think that's quite deceitful. And it still means it's on the way to something else. So the Scottish Government did put forward, right back in Christmas 2016, a compromise deal of us staying in single market and customs union, even inside the UK, and it was chucked out and completely ignored. But yeah, I mean, obviously we want to try and limit the harm, but the thing is, there is no option that doesn't do harm. And while you talk about the date was set by Parliament. Parliament can actually reform the Withdrawal Act and change the date and take it out. And in the court case that was brought in the European Court of Justice yesterday was Scottish parliamentarians right across to the European Parliament challenging, could Article 50 be stopped unilaterally?
But
the
Commission doesn't want that.
No. What the Commission said, it could certainly be stopped, but their view is it needs unanimous agreement of the 27. But on both sides of the argument, it is that it could be stopped. So in one, we're asking, can we just stop it? But certainly the Commission have conceded for the first time that they would put forward Article 50 being taken back, but all 27 countries would have to agree.
The same question I put to James Frith to you, which is, do you not risk, in voting this deal down, a no deal?
No, I'm sorry, because I do not accept that we should be given Hobson's choice, which is a rubbish deal that doesn't satisfy Leavers or Remainers against no deal. I mean, it's literally Hobson's choice, and it simply isn't. There are other things...
How do you stop it, then?
Because, as I say, they can say they're going to have to bring a withdrawal agreement bill, and within that can be taking the date off, can be asking for an extension of Article 50, could be taking Article 50 back, could be looking at all these other variations. But there isn't one thing in this that doesn't do harm, and the interesting thing is what they've modelled on is Chequers, and the withdrawal agreement is not even Chequers.
So when you hear these two starting to sort of plan and plot what they might be able to do when you all work together to vote the deal down, do you not worry that you might lose Brexit entirely?
No.
I mean, you're going to get 60, let's pick a figure, 60, 70% of what you maybe didn't dream of getting 5 years ago. Do you not just want to bank that and then work from there?
No, because and the reason I say that is because I've read The Beast.
Right.
So, for instance, if you go to... let me answer your question. If you go to Article 174, which is on page 286...
I've read this already.
Right, OK, right. So you'll know that what it says is, in the event of a dispute between the UK and the EU about the operation of what would be a treaty, if we pass this, it's a treaty under international law, it goes to an arbitration panel, and if the arbitration panel can't settle the dispute, then on the question, the Court of Justice of the European Union shall have jurisdiction to give such a ruling which shall be binding on the arbitration panel. That means the European Court of Justice can overrule Parliament and overrule the Supreme Court. We are not, when you read this beast, taking back control of our laws, so we're not leaving the European Union, so I ain't going to vote for this if they put a shotgun in my mouth.
But that would be in the case of a binding arbitration. They'd already have had a... You know, it's a fairly...
No, but
I mean, are you really going to risk Brexit on that, which may not even ever be triggered?
The Prime Minister has said ad nauseum we would take back control of our laws.
She said end the direct jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice.
Said
that is indirect jurisdiction.
No, hang on. It's on the applicability of EU law in the UK, which would continue in a number of...
Indirectly via a committee.
No, hang on. We would still be bound effectively to EU law in areas like the environment, employment and social policy. I've read the agreement. Yeah. OK, so there, any dispute there, the ECJ is sovereign, not our Supreme Court. Now, the Prime Minister has said ad nauseum, we will take back control of our laws. We don't.
So
we don't.
You do leave the EU flags go down, there's no Commission, there's no Council, there's no European elections. It's a partial win from where you were 5 years ago.
No, that is, in a nutshell, I mean...
Was it worse than the EU membership?
The problem with the withdrawal agreement, which is legally binding, it's a treaty, is it leaves us half in and half out of the EU.
Well, it was 52-48.
Well, no, look, the people voted to leave, OK? You can't be slightly pregnant. OK, the people of this country voted to leave the European Union.
Right.
Well, this does not do that.
We're getting into some detail here. It's good detail. Let's go back to Parliament and see John McDonnell on this urgent question.
Analysis of various Brexit scenarios.
Secretary to the Treasury, Minister Mel Stride.
Mr. Speaker, today the government published the analysis of the economic and fiscal effects of leaving the European Union, honouring the commitment made to this House. It is important to recognise that the analysis is not an economic forecast for the UK economy. It only considers potential economic impact specific to European Union exit, and it does not prejudge all future policy or wider economic developments. The analysis sets out how different scenarios affect GDP and the sectors and regions of the economy against today's arrangements with the European Union. 4 different scenarios have been considered. A scenario based upon the July White Paper, a no-deal scenario, an average FTA scenario, and an EEA-type scenario. Given the spectrum of different outcomes, and ahead of the detailed negotiations on the legal text of the deal, the analysis builds in sensitivity with effectively the White Paper at one end and a hypothetical FTA at the other. Mr. Speaker, turning now to the outcome of the analysis. The analysis shows that the outcomes for the proposed future UK-EU relationship would deliver significantly higher economic output, around 7 percentage points higher than the no-deal scenario. The analysis shows that a no-deal scenario would result in lower economic activity in all sector groups of the economy compared to the White Paper scenario. The analysis also shows that in the no-deal scenario, all nations and regions of the United Kingdom would have lower economic activity in the long run compared to the White Paper scenario, with Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland all being subject to a significant economic impact. What the government has published today shows that the deal on the table is the best deal. It honours the referendum and realises the opportunities of Brexit. It is a deal that takes back control of our borders, our laws and our money. And let me be very clear to the House, Mr. Speaker, and to those who say that the economic benefits of staying in the EU means that we should overturn the result of the referendum. To do so would open up the country to even further division and turbulence, and undermine the trust placed by the British people in our democracy. So what this House and our country face today is the opportunity presented by the deal, a deal that honours the result of the referendum and safeguards our economic future. Or the alternative, Mr. Speaker, the risk of no deal or indeed of no Brexit at all.
Order. Somebody said something about dishonest. No member should accuse another member of being dishonest in this chamber. I'm not quite sure who I heard, but that must not be repeated. This is a disagreement between honourable and right honourable members, and colleagues must remember that. John McDonnell. Yeah.
The Chancellor promised us that the House would have a detailed economic analysis of the options ahead of the meaningful vote on Brexit. The least, I say, Mr Speaker, the least that we could expect is instead of touring the broadcast studios, the Chancellor himself would be here to present an oral statement with the information. But let's be clear, we're now in the ludicrous position of seeing an analysis produced today on the economic implications of Brexit, which is in fact largely an assessment of the Chequers proposals abandoned months ago. What the analysis produced by the Treasury today shows us is this: if the no-deal scenario with no net EA migration comes to pass, something the government has recklessly, if incredibly, been threatening, we could see a GDP almost 11% lower than compared to today's arrangements. Under the hard Brexit, some of backbenchers opposite have been promoting, it would be 7% smaller. Only a Chancellor who talks about little extras for schools would talk about this kind of effect, I quote, being a little smaller. Can the Minister confirm that no deal is not an option the government will allow to happen? So does the Minister agree that the one thing this document shows is actually the deal on the table is even worse than the abandoned Chequers deal? Has the government done any analysis whatsoever of the actually proposed backstop arrangements, and are these going to be published in advance of the vote in a few days' time? What fiscal assumptions is the department making about extending the transition period, given there may be no limit to what the European Union could ask for in return for such an extension? And to be frank, if his government is not prepared to put jobs and the economy first in their Brexit negotiations, isn't it time they just stepped aside and allowed Labour to negotiate that deal?
Minister! Well, Mr Speaker, can I just deal with the first point that the Right Honourable Gentleman made about the Chancellor? The Chancellor is, of course, accountable to this House. The Chancellor will be appearing before the Treasury Select Committee on Wednesday to give full account of the arrangements that we're discussing today, and indeed the Prime Minister herself will be appearing before the Liaison Committee. The Right Honourable Gentleman raised the issue of the Chequers deal and the fact that analysis is being based around that in this paperwork. That is entirely appropriate, given the fact that, as he will know, the political declaration itself suggests a spectrum of possible outcomes for these arrangements, which is why not only do we analyse the Chequers proposal, but we also have a sensitivity analysis around that proposal as well. He raises the issue of a no-deal scenario. It is the Labour Party that is pushing us more in the direction of a potential no-deal scenario by, I have to say it, for their own political reasons, deciding to object to the deal that we have put forward. And, Mr Speaker, that deal, just to be clear, is firstly good for safeguarding the economic future of our country, and it also delivers on the 2016 referendum, getting us control of our borders, of our money, of our laws, making sure we protect the integrity of the United Kingdom, go out and do our future trade deals, and that is something that this government is totally committed to achieving. Mr Kenneth Clarke.
Mr Speaker, would my honourable friend accept that it is not possible to leave a free trade area with most important wealthy customers and introduce tariff barriers, custom delays, regulatory divergences and delays at borders without making this country poorer than it otherwise would be? And it's difficult to see how anybody who follows economic policy can argue the contrary whilst keeping a straight face. So can he actually reassure me that the withdrawal agreement that is being put before the House enables no change at all to be made to our economic and trading arrangements through March of next year, until we go into a transition period that can be extended as long as is necessary to introduce practically any economic arrangement for the future that we want? It's obvious to me we should stay in the single market and the customs union. Can you reassure me that that is still a perfectly reasonable possibility?
Minister!
Well, I think the Right Honourable Learned Gentleman raised a number of points, Mr Speaker, on the issue of the economic impact of the proposed deal compared to, for example, the status quo, i.e. a relationship as it persists today with the European Union. And the paper actually doesn't duck that question. It makes it very clear that it will be detrimental in the economic sense. I mean, that is extremely clear. But I would put to the Right Honourable Gentleman that the deal is the best for the economy going forward as part of a deal that also delivers on several other things, some of which are entirely non-economic, such as control of our borders and free movement.
Indeed.
So that is an urgent question posed by the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Some dissent and annoyance that the Chancellor himself did not answer that. It was left to Mel Stride, a junior Treasury Minister. Intriguing comments there by Ken Clarke, who is somebody who, much to Number 10's relief, had announced he was going to back the PM in the vote that's going to happen in just under a couple of weeks' time. But he sounded pretty critical of the government there and said he wanted to basically keep the United Kingdom in the single market and the customs union. Forgive me, I didn't hear if he changed his mind fully or whether he thought that that would come after any vote came down. But anyway, let's bring back in our panel, just finally, to wrap up, a fairly eventful Prime Minister's questions. James Frith, I mean, does this change the game, though? Surely anyone that believed this stuff will believe it, and if they don't believe it, they don't believe it. You have a Leave voting constituency. Nobody's going to be reading this stuff.
I think over the last 2 years, the realities of Brexit have been compared to the rhetoric of Brexit. The rhetoric that we still hear from Mark and his colleagues, long-standing tradition in the Conservative Party, but the ERG is a long way from where the majority of the people I speak to in Bury North that voted Leave are. And those realities are of the damage to people's livelihoods and the prospects in towns like mine. And I think people will read these figures in great concern and in detail and begin to reflect on what needs to happen next, because this deal is the worst of both worlds. It's why I won't be supporting it. I'm going to bring Philippa in for 20 seconds.
Well, I mean, I find it bizarre that they didn't model the thing we're expected to vote on in a couple of weeks. Yeah. What this is, they keep talking about the deal. What Mark waves around, that big telephone directory, is the withdrawal agreement. The deal, sadly, is the little 6.5 pages. This is a blind Brexit, which will have a huge...
That's the withdrawal agreement.
Yeah, the
deal is what you have in the future. That's what matters.
5 seconds to wrap up.
No, this is a draft treaty. This is at the heart of the deal. If you vote with the Prime Minister, you vote for the treaty. If you vote against it, you vote against it.
I must end that there. Do join us at Sky News for more analysis on this after break.
Thanks, Faisal. This is Sky News. It's 1 o'clock. The headlines. We'll all be poorer after Brexit. The Treasury paints a picture of our economic future in a no-deal scenario. But the Prime Minister says that won't happen.
This analysis does not show that we'll be poorer in the future than we are today. No, it doesn't. It shows we'll be better off with this deal.
A survivor of the Rotherham child sex exploitation scandal calls for a change in the law following claims a man who raped her was invited to have a role in her child's life by the council.
Police charge a 16-year-old boy over an attack on a Syrian refugee at a school in Huddersfield.
President Putin accuses Ukraine's leader of plotting a naval clash to boost his popularity ratings.
And the size of a giant cow, a reprieve from the abattoir for this steer in Western Australia.